The 5 roles in League have experienced many changes during the game's tenure. If anyone from the days of Season 1, 2, or 3 were to come back to the game now, despite Summoner's Rift staying largely the same, the game would be entirely unrecognizable to them regardless of what role they play. More champions can be played in each role, more items can be purchased, there are new options for gaining a lead, new win conditions, and things to consider. Calling the game different would certainly be an understatement, but the one role that underwent the most transformation would without question be the jungle. Widely regarded as the hardest role to play and master, its members' ability to freely traverse the map and influence all 3 lanes has amassed an almost meme-like reputation for being the only role that matters in deciding the outcome of the game, or in layman's terms, jungle diff. But it wasn't always like that. At one point, the fandom's perception of the jungle was the complete opposite. It was believed to be the least impactful role in the game, often being referred to as a second support. What exactly caused such a drastic shift in opinion? Lately, you guys have been enjoying my history videos, as evident by how well they performed in reception, and I myself have been enjoying taking a look into the game's storied history. So for today, we'll be analyzing how the jungle transformed into supposedly the most important role in League of Legends. The chain of events that took place in the jungle over the years has been documented extensively, from the rise and dominance of its star players, to endless complaints about how overpowered the role is, to unpleasantly degenerate metas like vertical jungling or double scuttlecrab. There is no shortage of content for you to explore on this topic. What I wanted to do for today was give a breakdown of the many factors that took part in building up the jungle to where it is today. Of course, to do that, we have to establish a bit of historical context first by going over how it all began. In the very early days of the game, the jungle was actually nothing more than window dressing and carried almost no significance beyond providing ways for champions to traverse from one side of the map to the other. The neutral camps within it served to provide a token bit of experience and gold on the off chance you had a few seconds to spare, but there was no actual jungler who spent the majority of their time running around. All 5 champions were laners because there weren't enough resources for you to sustain yourself through jungle camps alone. Not enough gold, experience, what have you. The jungle was just there for the sake of being there and had yet to be developed into what it is today. In essence, there was no established position for the jungle compared to top, mid, AD carry, and support. It took a fair bit of time before systems and infrastructure were implemented to formally recognize it. Even then, for roughly the first half of the game's timeline, the jungle retained a very supportive enabling motif to it rather than a solo carry role. Around roughly Season 2 and 3 is where I would say the jungle became more pronounced as a role, and the practice of jungling was made commonplace. Riot made several quality of life adjustments, introducing a few things that assisted champions in getting past the first few levels where they were at their weakest. Prior to that, only a select few champions could even survive in the jungle from the start of the game, much less thrive. Believe it or not, the jungle was actually a highly lucrative source of gold, so much so that you could outpace the gold accumulation of laners by jungling, although that was way easier said than done since jungle camps were immensely challenging to take down, especially early on. Warwick was one of very few candidates who could realistically handle himself in the jungle, owing to his innate sustain and persistent DPS without reliance on mana. The majority of the game's available roster at the time couldn't survive their first clear, as they would run out of either health, mana, or simply take too long to clear to the point where they would fall behind the rest of the team anyway. In Season 2, they reworked the jungle, reducing the health and damage of jungle monsters along with their golden experience to lower the barrier to entry for champions. Initially, they succeeded at doing so, and the pool of viable candidates was expanded upon, but the limited access to gold forced many of them to rely on gold-generating items such as Philosopher's Stone and Heart of Gold, which offered more sustainability in the jungle in addition to bonus gold generation over time. Even then, jungle champions were consistently behind in resources during the early parts of the game, limiting the champion pool to those who could get by on very little, such as tanks and the like. This is partly why jungle was considered the second support, referencing how both roles had comparatively less access to gold relative to top, mid, and AD carry, and this is also why carry junglers were few and far between back then. So in essence, Season 2 made it easier for more champions to be fielded in jungle, but compromised too much on golden experience to do so, leaving jungle in more or less the same position. Season 3 found a middle ground for all of this with the advent of Hunter's Machete, the first jungle item. Before its introduction, most junglers had to go Cloth Armor 5 pot just to survive the beating they took from the first few camps. Machete, on the other hand, not only allowed them a more reliable way to clear camps early on, but a cheap, cost-effective first item, upgrading into Spirit of the Elder Lizard or Spirit of the Spectral Wraith. These items not only made things more forgiving when it came to jungle clearing, but they offered some combat stats as well, ensuring you could hold your own in a skirmish. You no longer had to forfeit combat pressure just to survive in the jungle. Hunter's Machete gave you the ability to clear camps and build into a practical combat item, whereas before, most junglers were hamstrung from wasting money on potions and or building tank items to not lose all their health on one camp. This marked a major turning point for the jungle as it laid the groundwork for what would ultimately create the jungle role we have today, highlighting the first contributing aspect of jungle becoming the 1v9 role, infrastructure. Over the past 10+ years, more and more infrastructure was laid out for junglers. They began with Smite, a summoner spell that accelerated the clear speed of a jungler, especially in the early game, and assisted junglers in securing neutral objectives in the late game. Then we had Hunter's Machete and the 2 Spirit items, an economical early game purchase that enabled junglers to stay competitive with their laners. This was enhanced even further in Season 5 with the new jungle items, Poacher's Knife, Ranger's Trailblazer, Skirmisher's Saber, and Stalker's Blade, catering towards different playstyles and different champions for more coverage. Around the same time, Smite gave you temporary buffs based on the camp. For example, Raptors gave you True Sight, Wolves gave you a bit of jungle vision, Gromp would enhance your combat pressure by having your attacks deal poison damage over time, etc. They eventually took out Poacher's Knife and Ranger's Trailblazer for Tracker's Knife, giving junglers more access to vision. This kind of brought back the meme of being a second support, but if we take into account how the jungle is always dark, some extra wards are especially handy for you and your team. Not to mention most junglers want to go Oracles for their trinket to negate enemy vision, so Tracker's Knife proved to be almost invaluable, which is why it was taken away in Season 8. Stalker's Blade and Skirmisher's Saber introduced another way for junglers to maintain the same level of pressure as the laners by turning Smite into a combat summoner, with the former dealing a small bit of true damage and stealing movement speed to catch up to opponents, and the latter measurably reducing the target's damage output while applying true damage over time on hit in the same fashion as Red Buff, a substantial augmentation of combat strength, almost too substantial. Items were further developed over time as well, beginning with the enchantment upgrades, Warrior, Cinderhulk, Sated Devourer, which became Blood Razor, and Runeglaive, which became Runic Echoes. Each of these enchantments offered a discounted version of a completed item, trading a bit of stats for better affordability and of course the jungle clearing and smite enhancing properties. Warrior was the jungle counterpart to Yomu's Ghostblade, Cinderhulk was the counterpart to Sunfire Cape, Blood Razor was the counterpart to Blade of the Ruined King, and Runic Echoes was the counterpart to Luden's Echo. With these items, junglers could acquire the same benefits as first purchase completed items, no longer delaying their early to mid-game power spike. Even though Spirit of the Elder Lizard and Spectral Wraith gave combat stats at a low cost, the focus was more on the gold generation property. The combat stats were a side dish, whereas the enchantments focused entirely on combat stats, being on par with the counterpart versions, if not better given their gold efficiency. By Season 6 to 7, the jungle was no longer just an auxiliary role that can marginally influence the outcome of a match. It was a stable presence in every game, whose champions could drastically affect their team's chances of victory for better or worse. But they were far from done with making improvements to the role, as you no doubt remember. Beginning in Season 11 with the new mythic item system, they revisited the jungle items once more. While the enchantments made sure that jungle items were at the very least not a dead inventory slot in terms of combat, they were inherently incompatible with the new mythic items, which were meant to be first purchases, taking into account their playstyle forming passives and or actives, as well as the stat accumulation from their mythic passive. So they axed the jungle item thing altogether, no longer mandating that you purchase a specific item to upgrade your smite with the new Ember Knife and Hailblade, upgrading smite automatically after using it a number of times. Now, junglers officially had the same build path options as laners. They could build anything they want for their first item. Item choice was obviously the most integral part of the progression of jungle, but there were more changes given to them on a structural level too. For one, Dragon. What was once an additional source of gold became a top priority objective. The passive stats would not only give your team an edge in combat, but they would ultimately culminate into the Dragon Soul, an even stronger permanent buff with almost game-deciding consequences. If you think I'm exaggerating, teams with the Dragon Soul have at least an 87.5% win rate or higher, with Cloud Soul easily being over 90. Needless to say, Dragon Souls are almost essentially instant win buttons and must be factored into a team's mid and late game macro strategy, if not to acquire them, then to prevent the enemy team from doing so. Naturally, with such an important objective on the line, this puts more emphasis on the jungler's performance, as they're the only ones who can reliably secure the objective through Smite. Compounding the necessity of jungle was the rework to Baron, granting the team who struck it down a monumental increase in combat stats, siege pressure, and map rotation speed all in one, including the golden experience. A single Baron buff in the mid to late game, while not indefinite, could lead to your team gaining lasting advantages across the map, including but not limited to taking down multiple turrets and potentially inhibitors. The Rift-Herald also posed another objective to keep in mind, a summoned unit that when used correctly could single-handedly break open several towers and even an inhibitor. Given you can obtain up to 2 in a single match, they might actually be more critical of an objective than even Baron itself, or it could enable you to secure Baron more easily once it does spawn. Epic monsters went from side quests your team could do as a means of getting more resources to focal points that effectively decide whether you win or lose, placing more importance on Smite and therefore making the jungler more paramount for the team's success. Another element that played a big part in making the jungle more influential was the adjustments made to add more accessibility and abundance to it. As mentioned earlier, jungle camps used to be very profitable back in the day, but it was offset by the prohibitive difficulty in clearing camps. To alleviate this, they made jungle monsters easier to clear but lowered the golden experience to equal it out. Over time, however, they brought that golden experience to around the same ballpark as what you can obtain in the same time's worth of minions, making power farming just as profitable as acquiring gold via ganking, if not more. To start, there are more camps now than before. The Scuttle Crab was implemented at the beginning of Season 5, which means more gold and experience. The infamous Double Crab meta was one of the dumbest time periods in the history of League. I don't remember the exact details, and frankly I don't want to, but I believe at its peak, just by taking both Scuttle Crabs over your opponent, you would be up a full level over them. I'm not even kidding. In addition, the White, now Gromp, was added to the game sometime around Season 3. I actually didn't know this until researching it, but Gromp wasn't always there at the start. It used to only be Wraiths, now Raptors, Krugs, and Wolves. So the total number of accessible camps went from 6 to 8, not counting enemy camps of course. On top of more gold and experience, they gradually made jungle clearing easier and easier. A huge barrier to entry for the jungle was the immense difficulty in clearing them, namely the first clear. Having virtually no items, you had to rely solely on your base stats and 1 or 2 abilities as you made your way through the jungle the first time around. This heavily constrained Tuka jungle due to not many champions having an adequate combination of sustain, DPS, and resource efficiency. It's no coincidence that champions like Hecarim, Rengar, Kha'Zix, Elise, Vi, anyone who came out after Season 2 has some semblance of healing or shielding in their kit no matter how out of place. It was to mitigate how much health you lost throughout the jungle. Continuing down the list, Zac is sustain, Rek'Sai sustain, Echo is a shield, Kindred heals, Ivern's Ivern, Kayn heals with E, which makes no sense, Lilia heals with passive. This was 100% intentional. As to the champions that came out before then, they retroactively gave them sustain 2 in the form of Smite, which healed you for a portion of your max HP against monsters from Season 7 onwards. It was eventually taken out in pre-Season 13, but for that entire time, every jungler could basically full clear without dropping below even half, thanks to Smite. And by Season 13, jungle clearing became so easy that there was no need for a healer. Plus Ember Knife and Hailblade gave you healing versus camps anyway. At one point, the Scuttle Crab also used to regenerate your health and mana upon being killed, conveniently spawning around the time you finish your first clear, so you didn't have to recall it, just had to kill the crab. Another change that came in were plants. The Blast Cone, Honey Fruit, and Scryer's Bloom, each very useful in their own right. The Blast Cone gave non-mobile junglers better traversability around the map, especially when it came to ganking, opening up more avenues of entry into lanes that now need to be considered by the laners. Scryer's Bloom gave True Sight in a very large area. The proof is in the pudding on why that's handy. And of course, Honey Fruit, yet another form of sustenance for champions. We now reached a point where the viability of a jungler hinges less on how healthily they clear and more on how fast they clear, since no one takes any damage anymore. With how lenient the jungle has become, there are so many more champions you can play, increasing the range of applications and things you can do as a jungler, thus increasing its carry potential. Before, you only had to worry about tanks, maybe fighters. Now you have to think about marksman junglers, mage junglers, assassin junglers, skirmisher junglers, support junglers even. They got options. Overall, the 3 things that made jungle go from an optional diversion to arguably the most important role in the game are 1. The improvements to its infrastructure in terms of better itemization, adjustments to smite, more objectives, meaning more attention you have to pay, etc. 2. Better scaling adjustments. Junglers now get roughly the same golden experience as their laners, whereas before they would have to supplement via gold income items, delaying their item power spikes all the same. And 3. More accessibility. Camps are easier to clear, plants give universal options for junglers so that all classes and all types can succeed. It's really fascinating. For how much we as a community butt heads over everything, it feels like every top, mid, ADC, and support silently agree that jungle is the most impactful role. Or maybe it's because jungle is the most flexible and open-ended role in the game that when it's unclear who to blame, everyone defaults to it. But I mean, hey. Among the 4 roles that Tyler 1 played during his quest to hit Challenger across the entire Rift, jungle was the fastest. So, jungle diff, just saying. But anyways, hope you guys found this insightful. The jungle went through a lot of changes, some good, some bad, but regardless of what opinion you have towards it, I think it's cool to see how much it evolved throughout the years, and I'm curious to see if it will continue to. If you guys enjoyed the video, it would be great if you'll have to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other history videos if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.